you.
Okay, we will move over to our third group. This is Carbon Killers, a group made up of Chevening and CSC alumni, correct me if I'm wrong, from Pakistan, Egypt and Russia, but presenting on a topic based on the European region. The presenter will be Yasir Thara, and answering questions in the chat we have Nihal Mounir Darraj. Over to you.
Thank you, Catherine. So I'll present on behalf of my team, and our policy is called ETS Plus, which is inspired by the European Trading Emission System. Next slide, please. So as we speak, two global trends are on a constant rise: global temperature and global population. With an estimated 10 billion people living on Earth by the next decade, no logical scenario can neglect fossil fuels in the future energy mix. And realizing this as a ground reality, one of our biggest challenges right now in Europe is how to transition and how to meet the ambitious Green Deal and Fit for 55 targets. We believe that our best shot at limiting global warming is carbon capture and storage. But the problem with CCS is that it does not generate any money in its value chain. So this raises a big question. Who finances these mega projects? Is it public? Is it private investors? Or is it something else? Next slide, please. To answer these questions and enable the circular carbon economy, where CCUS is a key pillar, our first solution is modifying the current EU ETS, European Union Emission Trading System, in a way that institutions are able to directly finance CCS projects at any stage of the value chain, rather than buying the emission allowances from other installations. This would require an established infrastructure for CCS and a high but one-time investment into the development of the facilities. And to de-risk the initial investment and provide security, we propose three different funding routes. The first is the EU Innovation Fund, which should have a fixed quota for the CCS projects. The second is the government funding proportional to the historical emissions of each country since the pre-industrial levels. And the third is the subsidies in form of tax credits for private investors and companies, a model very much similar to 45Q in the United States. Obviously, collaboration within a multi-industry hub will also allow companies to avoid high upfront costs associated with creating standalone CO2 transport and storage projects. Next slide, please. Removing CO2 from the environment will not only help us achieve our climate change targets, but allow us to utilize cheaper energy sources through the transition period. If not for CCS, industries such as cement, steel, and aviation will either have to shut down due to the high carbon levels or pay heavy fines, which will reflect in inflating commodity prices. On the other hand, once this market is well established and the infrastructure is already scaled up, it will attract more and more industries to be part of the value chain, rather than paying fines or investing huge sums of money to move the operations outside the European Union, therefore preventing carbon leakage. Last, in our opinion, such a marketplace in European Union can provide a huge space for tech and innovation research and cost competitiveness, which can bring the cost of CCS down in future. And we believe such a marketplace can lead to a lower cost of storing a ton of carbon dioxide into the ground, rather than buying it from the for the emissions allowances. Next slide, please. So as mentioned earlier, the ETS Plus is a modification to the current emission trading system. And to give an example, I'll show you an animation. So imagine, could you go back a click, please? Oh, yeah, just one more click, thank you. So yeah, one more click, please. So yeah, imagine we have an installation A and installation B, both having the same amount of emission allowances. But somehow installation A was able to reduce their emissions. In the current scenario, installation B can buy these allowances from installation A by paying a carbon price. And the problem is that even though A reduced their emissions, B was able to increase it because of the trading, which is why the CO2 emissions were not reduced at all, overall. In our model, what we suggest is that instead of buying these allowances from installation A, installation B should invest that amount of money into storing and capturing and storing carbon under the ground. This model provides the clientele for scaling up the CCS infrastructure funded by the Innovation Fund, governments, and subsidies that I already talked about previously. We also realize that implementing this in every European country might be a challenge simply because of the lack of storage sites and the expertise, which is why we believe cross-border transportations, such as the one in London Protocol, should be upheld, and the policy must be implemented in two phases. The first phase is where more developed countries which already have an oil and gas infrastructure where they can store the carbon under the ground, such as UK, Netherlands, Denmark, and Norway, can adopt this model, look at the lessons learned, and since we already talked about cross-border transportation agreements, we also want to promote countries which do not have this infrastructure to transport their CO2 to these countries where it can be stored. And once we have this experience in the phase 1 with early adopters,
1 minute remaining.
Thank you. We can then scale it up to phase 2, where the other countries in the region can also adopt this framework of ETS plus that we suggested. Overall, CCS has a huge potential to decarbonize Europe, and it is one of the only technologies available which actively removes carbon dioxide from the environment. And with the innovation and development already present in the European region, we believe that Europe can be a role model for adopting this policy and then be a role model for the entire world to follow. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Yasir. A first animation of the day. I'll hand over to the judges. Great, Niti has his hand up. Niti, over to you.
Hi, Yasir. I've been following developments on CCS for more than 20 years now. And in my opinion, there is still no practical, cost-effective implemented model in the world at present. So it's a technology which is talked about a lot. Yet you see, even the oil and gas companies at the height of, when the height of the cost of oil, tried and shunned away from it, So when you're offering it as a solution to the weaknesses in the ETS, I will put it to you that what you're offering is an expensive, high technology, not practically implementable solution. And therefore, wouldn't it be easier if the problem is that companies are buying allowances so that they can emit more carbon, close that loophole and don't allow them to buy allowances and ask down to zero emissions where they are? Wouldn't that be a simpler option than going into this CCS technology, which is at the end of the day is going to be quite expensive?
Yeah, so thank you for your question. And I'll agree with a part of your question and I'll disagree with the rest. So I'll answer it in three prongs. So first one is the need for the fossil fuel. And a lot of industries currently cannot further lower their emissions, such as steel, cement, and with an overpopulation, the way the population is increasing, these industries will have to, if they want to function, they will need fossil fuels, right? With that being said, CCS, yes, it is a new technology, it's expensive, which is why we also realized in our first slide that financing these projects is a big challenge. However, if you look in Europe, especially because we're talking about European region, if you go to Norway or if you look at Denmark, there are already projects which are investing a lot of money and a lot of carbon directly into the ground. So projects like Northern Lights, projects like Green Sands in Denmark, or Humber project in UK. So these things are not really a far-fetched reality anymore. Things are happening. And the reason why companies feel that investing money into CCS is better than buying an allowance is because right now the carbon price in the allowance system is at $70 or $80 a ton of carbon. And the cost of CCS is at $100 or $110 a ton of carbon storage, right? And if we are able to balance this mismatch between the two prices, no company would want to buy an allowance if they already have an infrastructure where they can directly pump their carbon into a pipeline, goes to the ground. And this is exactly why we suggested to modify the ETS, because we realized that we don't have enough funds for these projects, so someone has to pay for it. And instead of paying it to the innovation fund, why not pay it to a company that can directly store the carbon into the ground? So it's kind of like a circular loop where we believe that at least until 2030 or 2050, it's impossible to remove the use of fossil fuels and impossible to remove the emissions of carbon dioxide into the environment. But what we can do is be counteractive and store it back or remove it from the environment. So it's kind of like a circular loop with a lot of challenges, yes, but I believe being ambitious is how we'll meet our ambitious targets.
Fantastic. Another grueling question from our judges and handled excellently. Thanks so much for your presentation, Yasir, and the team.